Brother Floyd, what's on your mind?
Well, honestly, right internally, I'm feeling like I'm in need of a lot of prayer right now and meditation. I could feel that the need for me to recenter myself and for me to really focus on my internal narrative. And the reason why is because, for all of my critique of the way our town could be better, I really do love Minneapolis. I mean, this is my city. I think it's a great place. I raised my kids here. I moved here and I stayed here by choice. And so I really love Minneapolis. And I just really hate what these people are doing. Not when I say these people, I don't mean the protesters. What I mean is some of these folks who seem like they're from outside of the city who have come here to destroy it and try to besmirch the reputation of the righteous, noble protests. I mean, I saw a guy who was wearing all black, had on a gas mask, and was carrying a black umbrella, and it was not raining, breaking glass in businesses, throwing incendiary devices in there. The fact that they destroyed businesses on Broadway, which is a 15-minute highway drive from the site of where Mr. Floyd was killed, these things got me upset. And of course, I was already, managing emotion because of what happened to Mr. Floyd. That in and of itself is disturbing. And then, of course, the pandemic is not gone away. We topped 1,000 deaths in Minnesota, a few days away. It seems like we're compounding a lot of very difficult situations. What I say to people is that it is time to really, take a moment to pray, to meditate, to go inside and to gather yourself, to center yourself, and to make sure that you're making good decisions based on logic, based on proper emotional responses, because it is when we're in these heightened states of anxiety that we often don't make the decisions that we really, really want to make. So that's actually how I'm feeling right now.
So let me go in three stages here. One is talk, and I'll give you the three. Talk about George Floyd, sort of recap what happened and what has been the formal response to that now from Hennepin County. And there's discussion about somebody wanting to move that process to your office at the state level. Talk about that. Two, I want to talk about what started off and what was intended to be protest, how that has devolved has bifurcated. The protests are going and need to go, but there's a negative element that's spinning out of that. And the third thing is to talk about where do we go from here. I think at the end of the day, you and I are going to agree that the resilience of the people of Minnesota, human resilience, is a marvelous thing. And we have to begin now talking about the restoration of opportunity, restoration of all the businesses on West Broadway, the business on Lake Street, the opportunity for people of color, and how that discussion should begin. So first of all, let's recap on the George Floyd. Where do we stand right now with that?
Well, as of yesterday, the Mr. Chauvin was charged with murder and manslaughter. He was arrested, brought into custody. The complaint has been issued, filed. A complaint is a formal document known as a pleading, where sufficient facts have to be essentially alleged to support the allegation or the criminal charge. So in other words, there's got to be enough of a factual basis, or at least a believed factual basis, to say, we believe these facts are true, and if true, they would support these charges. That has happened. The charges of murder, there's various degrees of murder. This particular murder charge is third degree, and it says that if you, without intending to kill somebody, do kill them in the course of engaging in deliberate indifference, depraved mind, behavior, then you will be liable for murder. And that is what he's charged with. It carries with it a statutory maximum sentence of 25 years in prison. And it has a guidelines presumption of 150 months in prison, which is about 12 and a half years. And it has a range that can go up to 180 months, which is, a long, very long period of time. So I would say that, it's a preliminary document. It may be, you can amend a complaint. It's not necessarily the last word. And of course, everybody wants to know, what about those other three guys? And I would say that the investigation as to their culpability is ongoing. People should not conclude that this is the last word on that, but it's not necessarily, but I can't tell anybody what's going to happen. Again, it's not my case. And here's the thing, if it were my case, I couldn't really talk about this.
Right.
And I know.
Is there a scenario in which it might become your case?
Well, at this point, I consider that to be unlikely, because there's only two ways that a case can become my case. One is if the county refers it, and the other is if the governor appoints me. At this point, the county attorney has taken the case; he's charging it. The investigations move forward. I have not formally asked for it. Don't have any plans to do so. But of course, let me just be clear, I am always ready to stand up and assist the cause of justice. And so that's where things stand right now.
Let's move to the question of the protest and the protests and events to memorialize or to honor the life of George Floyd. I think you said, and others have said, are worthwhile, worthy endeavors, that
Yes.
This is a life that deserves honor, and a situation that deserves attention. The manner, the method, the players in this activity, this transgression, ought to be looked at, examined. But we've moved from daytime, I think, peaceful and organized protest to another element emerging out of it and creating havoc, mayhem, burning, looting. Describe what is happening from where you stand. How do you see it? I mean, I'm watching it. I'm being COVID conscious and staying off the streets. I'm watching it on TV and watching social media, but it is almost too much. And I'm wondering how it is when you're actually out there in the community, as you are and others are. But describe how it looks to you.
Well, the one thing it looks like is that the absolute overwhelming number of people appear to be out there doing the righteous thing, which is to raise their voice. They got signs, they got T-shirts, they got slogans, they got leaflets. They're shouting, they're chanting, slogans and so forth. They're doing what people do in order to affect social change. I understand it. I've done it. I've planned it. I've been part of it. I believe in it. There is another element. And as I said, seeing a Caucasian man, and there's nothing wrong with anybody being white. I mean, that's not the point. But the point is, that is that person's description. All black outfit, black gloves. They're wearing a mask, but not a COVID mask, an actual mask that would protect them from tear gas. You understand? A gas mask. And they're carrying an umbrella that would, and it's not raining, and to shield them from but it would effectively shield them from what looked from an overhead photograph. And they're knocking windows out and then throwing incendiary devices. Protesters, legitimate protesters, who are the kind of protesters that you and I are used to, say, hey, man, who are you? And what are you doing? And what's your name? And taking pictures. Hey, stop. Let me talk to you. He won't stop. He's marching on a mission. Wisely, he's not running. Because if he's running, that catches attention. But he's walking deliberately away, trying to avoid the people who are trying to ask him a few questions. Now, you and I both know that in the Jamar Clark protest, white supremacists got on Facebook and said, oh, we're going to go get a dindu. They use this racist term. And then they show up and then they shoot at people who are protesters and then end up getting charged and going to prison for their criminal behavior. Mm-hmm. So we know that white supremacists will go to a protest and try to incite violence. Why wouldn't they, alongside the legitimate protests, destroy property and burn things, and then the general public thinks, oh, this is the protest, right? So this is what there's a name for it. It's called an agent provocateur, mm-hmm. And they've been filmed, they've been on camera, and some of them have been apprehended. And according to the governor, the mayor of both cities, they believe that is what's really driving this. People trying to break down civil society and really besmirch and tarnish the reputation of a legitimate, righteous protest that is aimed at achieving a just outcome.
That's a phenomenal. So how do communities, number one, not become discouraged and disheartened? Because what will happen is that as people who are not actively involved in the protest, but watching it, like I've been doing on TV, see this horrific looting activity on television, you end up grouping all of this into those people, their misbehavior, their capacity to be miscreants, and you turn off the whole idea of legitimacy of their feelings, their complaint, their indignation that stems from systemic and historic racial domination, segregation.
Very, very true.
So how do we, number one, create a narrative and project a narrative that explains what's going on so that people don't lose courage and that people get the right information that they need?
Well, one thing we need to do is tell the other side of the story. Vice magazine, which is an online source, issued an article that really kind of catalogs far-right extremists trying to manipulate and manage and parasitically and opportunistically use the protests. So we need to document it. We need to tell the story. We need to mainstream the story. It can't just stay on the media margins. It's got to get into the heart of the conversation. And so that is really important. There are pictures, there's video. It needs to be on the news. People need to see it to say, who is that guy? We need to find these people, hold them accountable for mayhem and arson and property destruction and things like that. So that's one thing. We need to tell the story. We need to lift up the story. We need to make sure that everybody knows the story. And then the other thing we need to do is keep on lifting up Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd, was a good man. He people loved him. People cared about him. They were of the mind that he was a man whose life was lived to the benefit of others. And we need to keep on just making sure that we center him as the conversation drifts only to civil disturbances, so-called riots. When you say, yeah, but this thing started with a knee on the neck that went for 8 minutes and change and went on for 2 minutes after they had determined that he didn't have a pulse. So, I mean, what about that?
A physician I talked to this morning, as an aside here, Keith, asked me to ask you, at what point does maintaining a stranglehold on someone, even though it might not have started off as intentional murder, for something to last more than 4 minutes, 6 minutes? And she said, ask you based on the fact that the science says how long a person can hold their breath and live.
Right.
And it's about 5 minutes or so, right? So if a person is going to be withheld from breathing, when does it become intentional as opposed to non-intentional? Because right now the idea of third degree is force that, though not intended, results in death. Is that correct?
Right. And so what she really wants to know is how come this isn't a second degree murder?
That's right.
And let me just say, it's not a first degree murder unless you have evidence to show that he premeditated the murder.
Does premeditation happen after you are in the process and you could stop and you choose not to stop? Does that become premeditated?
It would ultimately be an issue for the jury to resolve. The question is, could a prosecutor plead that in the complaint in good faith?
Mm-hmm.
And of course you could if there's facts to support it, but you're going to have some witness, some document, some expert witness to be able to come in here and say the intention of this person was thus. And of course, anytime we have to prove intent, we need facts to indicate what is essentially, a process of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And you can show intent, and we do it every day. And I think, and that's why I say this is a preliminary document.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody should assume that, this is all there's going to be. It's an early, if I may be really candid, and this may get me in trouble with some of my friends, one of the reasons that police cases tend to go longer than others, because it's often said, if I did this or you did this, we'd be charged already. Mm-hmm. And that's because all you got to prove is the elements of the crime. But when you deal with a police case, police are legally authorized to use force.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to show that there was no legal basis for the use of that force. You've got to show it's an unreasonable use of force by a reasonable police officer. Mm-hmm. Now, we may disagree that that's the right standard. You may say it shouldn't be the standard, but what you will find is that that's the standard and that we have at the moment. So, and then another thing we know about jury behavior is that jurors tend to resolve doubts in favor of the police. So, because of all those things, the link, the prosecutorial chain is made up of multiple links. And everybody says, charge him now, arrest him now. And I'm like, yeah, sounds great. But do you want that, or do you want to make sure that we get a conviction ultimately? And if you want a conviction, sometimes it's going to take a little longer than you want. I'm not finding fault with the prosecutor, because I understand that it's better to make sure that these convictions stick, mm-hmm. if we can get them, and I think we will. Because even after the conviction happens, there's a whole appeal process. And I'm gonna tell you, there's so many excessive force cases that there is a group of lawyers who have built up a lot of experience defending police officers. This case is not going to be handled by some first-year public defender. This is going to be held by lawyers who've been practicing law for 20, 30 years and handle multiple cases. So you're dealing with the big boys here. And so you got to be ready. So that's what I say to people, even though they say, well, you can see the tape. What's the problem? I'm like, yeah, you're going to have well-paid experts coming in here trying to say everything in the world that they can say to get these people out of accountability. So let's just, now that the guy is charged, I am saying this is preliminary. Let's let the prosecutor do what the prosecutor does. I'm not saying shut up. I'm not saying don't raise issues. I'm saying that at this point, it does make sense to understand that, you want to have a long-term satisfaction that justice was done, rather than short-term satisfaction that there was an arrest.
Keith, let me close on the last question I asked, and that is about where do we go from here? My first thought this morning was that we're going to require some kind of massive investment into North Minneapolis, West Broadway, Lowry Avenue, massive investment into Lake Street and South Minneapolis, massive investment into University Avenue in St. Paul. And that what we should be doing right now is talking about how we ensure that this investment both occurs and occurs in a way that enables and empowers Black, Latino, Native residents of the communities that are victims of this mayhem. How do we do this in a way that rebuilds and creates a flourishing, accessible, engaged commercial infrastructure that promotes entrepreneurism in our people, that we invest massively? What do you think about that? What do you see as the way forward?
I see we need a Marshall Plan scope and redevelopment, and it needs to be equitable and inclusive of the people who are most adversely affected. I also see that unless you do a meaningful police reform, unless you do meaningful police reform, do we end up back here 3 years after we do that redevelopment? If you don't deal with the underlying cause of injustice, this kind of stuff tends to happen. I can tell you that whenever you have lack of accountability with the police in communities of color, invariably you get a few things. One is you get dead people. Then the other thing you get is you get terrorized people who they may live, but they feel brutalized and they deal with PTSD and grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Then the third thing you deal with is you deal with civil judgments against the city. You pay out millions of dollars because of bad police officer behavior. And then the other thing you get is you get riots. Now, I'm not saying you should get them. I'm saying you do get them. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the Kerner Commission of 1968, which was an examination of urban civil disturbances, you will find in that document, it says, look, the kindling for these things may be poor housing, less discrimination, unemployment, but the spark is almost always an incident of excessive police force. Mm-hmm. Because the police are like the leading edge of the societal inequality. So because of that tends to spark these things. But let me ask you this. Okay, look, let's just accept that brutal people do brutal things. Well, if the system didn't condone it, why then does the system not hold the people accountable?
Right.
Why then did did Mike Brown grand jury never indict? Mm-hmm. Why did that particular prosecutor in Missouri instructed the grand jury? Mm-hmm. Why did nothing really happen? Why was there no bill of indictment in the Eric Garner case in New York? Why does the system always tend to alibi these bad guys? Because it tends to, which is why people protest, because they don't believe the system's going to deliver fair justice. And even if you get it to a jury, how could, like in the Walter Scott case, the jury acquitted. In the Rodney King case, the jury acquitted on the first time, not the federal one, but the next one. So, I mean, at the end of the day, man, people are concerned, but I would just say this: where we go from here, let us please bring calm to our city. Let us please, if we're going to protest peacefully. Let us have the protests basically protect the protests by taking photographs and having people who will really categorize people who are doing things totally opposite of the protest. Let's get the evidence. Let's get more pictures of these people who are doing these things that really tarnish the reputation and the noble goals of the protest. But that's where we go from here. With that, I have to say goodbye, but only for a moment. I'm always glad to be with you, Al, on Conversations with Al McFarlane.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you so much, and blessings to you, your family. Keep up the good work, and our prayers for the community, for our state, and for the family of George Floyd. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Be well.
Bye-bye. I'm Al McFarlane. A great conversation with Keith Ellison, Minnesota's Attorney General, a veteran in civil rights, human rights work, actually in protest and organizing. We're going to continue throughout the day talking to various people in our community. We invite you to sort of stay tuned or watch for posts or notices of new conversations like this one with people who are on the front line, who are trying to create a restoration of calm and peace in our community. I loved one idea. I don't know how you felt about it, but he said, what if people who were at the protest took pictures of each other? What if we create a map of who we are? And that mapping would also allow us to identify bad actors, people who are not doing what they should be doing. Think about it. I'm not sure if it's the right idea or not, but it comes to mind based on my conversation with Keith Ellison just now. I'll be back live, I think, at 12 noon. At 12 noon, I'm going to be in a conversation with Mel Reeves from the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder, also with the head of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis. He's going to be connecting with us in his role as leader of the NNPA, connecting and sharing a conversation about what's happening in Minnesota with Black publishers, the Black press, the Black community nationwide. So go to Facebook at noon for that conversation with Ben Chavis, director of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. And then throughout the day, check back here. We'll be connecting with other people here in Minnesota, talking about how we move forward. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you later.